It's a pity that neither that day nor a week later, never my daughter never called me back. I myself called her every day for a couple of weeks until I finally understood what the reason was. Ironically, although my kids blocked me on Facebook, they didn't block my dad. I later found out that when Kelly told me she was very busy, it was because she was going to the Black Friday sale that day with you and Grandma Roberts, I said sarcastically, using my air balloons, quotes. As for how I can know that my father died of a broken heart, that's easy. I never told my parents about our divorce. Yes, I was going to do it sooner or later, but I never could, I admitted, looking away and feeling tears welling up in my eyes. Brushing them away with the back of my hand, I took a deep breath and continued. When you left, I went to them the next weekend to talk about what happened between us, face to face. When I got there, I discovered how bad my mother's condition had become. Dad had told me before how forgetful she was sometimes, but since I last saw them the Christmas before last, her condition had seriously deteriorated. You obviously never knew about this, because not once in the last 3 years have you been able to go with me to their place when I took the children there. I could not resist directly hinting at those compelling reasons that, as we now both knew well, prevented Miri from accompanying me and the children every time. Because of my mother's illness, I did not have the right to bring this news to both of them then, and every week it became more and more difficult to do this. Anyway, on Thanksgiving Day, after we had finished the holiday dinner and put Mom to rest, Dad began asking me questions persistently because he had not heard anything from you or the children for over a year. So I had to tell him the truth about our breakup and your leaving. Miri, tense as a string, sat opposite me, placing her sharp elbows on the table and covering her mouth with both palms. Only eyes shining with tears and trembling eyelashes lived on her pale face. In the morning, I found my father in his favorite chair. I dully continued my sad story. He was sitting, leaning back and clutching our family photograph in his hands, the same sunny one in which all four of us laugh and fool around. She was still wet from his tears. So yeah, Miri, our divorce broke his heart. You know, Mom and Dad were married for 52 years. He was a man of the old school and, of course, hoped that you and I would be together until our death. I could no longer hold back the tears that continued to draw wet paths down my cheeks as I once again relieved that dark day. Rising sharply from the table, I turned to the window and stared at the pale blue sky with rare clouds floating across it. Miri's sniffles and quiet sobs could be heard behind her, resting my aching forehead against the cool glass. A minute later, without turning around, I spoke quietly again. It was at the funeral that I suddenly realized how much I'm alone in this world. The only people present at my farewell to Dad were me, the chaplain, and a couple of their neighbors. Nobody else came. I couldn't even bring my mother to the funeral, because she wouldn't even be able to understand what was happening. Only a week or two after the funeral, when my mother had recovered sufficiently, did I dare to tell her that my father was no longer with us? But I still can't stand the pain it causes her every time she hears and realizes it. So now when Mom asks about him, I just say that he went out for a while and will be back soon. Miri was already sobbing unashamedly, but I had no more tears left to cry. Over the past weeks, I had been emotionally completely devastated. My distracted gaze, wandering around the room, fell on the mantelpiece and stopped at the lonely greeting card lying on it. Miri, raising her red, tear-stained eyes, followed my gaze and obviously noticed what I was looking at. I continued in the same neutral, distant, and seemingly alien voice. You know, maybe I'm lonely. And even my mother doesn't recognize me now, but I owe her a huge debt just for bringing me into this world. So yes, I am packing everything here so that I can be there to look after her for however long she has left in this world. Finally, I turned to my ex-wife and stood up straight, crossing my arms over my chest. A bitter grimace of sarcasm permeated my last words to the one I loved so much for many years while we were together. It's amazing, isn't it? What were the consequences of your actions and how many people did it affect? You destroyed our marriage, you destroyed my relationship with my children, and on top of that, you destroyed my family. I finished the story, letting out the anger and poisonous accusation in my voice that I promised myself not to show, but I just couldn't do anything about it. Don't you dare blame all this on me. Miranda jumped up in response. Unlike you, Dan is devoted to me, and do not forget that you changed to me with Sandy Thompson. Jumping up from her seat and instantly blushing, she pointed her finger in my direction with indignation. I'm sure she didn't expect that in response to the accusation thrown right in the face, I would start laughing. And not just laughing, but really bursting into laughter, to the point of tears in my eyes. Oh yes, of course, I replied, barely catching my breath. Let's not forget about Sandy Thompson, the reason you spent 15+ years planning your revenge perfectly. I still remember that evening when you categorically told me not to mention her name in this house. Otherwise, you would immediately take the children and leave me forever. The ex-wife raised her chin arrogantly and defiantly crossed her arms over her chest, continuing to look at me defiantly. Well, Miri, now that you have, despite everything, carried out all your threats, I believe that this train has already left. But I still want you to hear this, once and for all. I never, not touched, to Sandy Thompson. Having shouted these words, I immediately felt great relief, looking into the eyes of Miranda, widened with shock and flashing confusion, frozen in place. As soon as I threw off the many years of understatement, a feeling of lightness descended on me, and I continued in a slightly calmer voice. When I woke up early in the morning in her bed, I was still wearing the same tuxedo, which I was wearing the night before. Nothing ever happened between us. Seriously? Do you really think that I will believe this fairy tale? Miri spat back at me with poisonous sarcasm. Of course, I expect you to believe me. Why? Yes, if only because I have never lied to you before, and of course I especially have no reason to lie to you now. When everything between us is over for a long time, I answered her more restrainedly, regaining my composure. I don't give a damn, talk what you want, she snorted, casually dismissive and sounding more like Kelly than the adult woman I was married to. For some reason, her indifferent response angered me. I could still see that she didn't believe what I was saying, but for some reason, it was important to me that she did. I grabbed my phone and put it on speaker and called my old office, motioning for Miranda to sit still and not interfere. After just a couple of rings, Jane, the receptionist, quickly answered. Hello, Jane, this is Alan Dowd. Oh, hi, Alan. Have you finished settling your affairs yet? My old friend responded cheerfully. Probably ready for a big move? You know, everything will be different here without you. The girl sighed with regret. Yes, everything is already packed. I just want to talk to my old friend one last time before I go on the road. Listen, I'm trying to reach a colleague in the Little Rock office. I'm not even sure if she still works there, so I was wondering if you could look into the system and see if you can find Sandy Thompson. Of course, Alan, wait a minute, Jane responded quickly, and for several seconds only the rapid clicking of the keyboard could be heard in the speaker. After a short pause, she came back to me. Yes, she still works for us, in the same branch in Little Rock. Do you need her number, or do you want me to connect you directly? Oh, thank you very much for your help. Just transfer my call to her line. And Jane, honey, take care of yourself. Remember, if Paul decides to make an honest woman out of you, I will be waiting for an invitation from you. Absolutely, Alan, Jane giggled. And don't forget us either, okay? Well, now I'm connecting you, you can talk. Listening to our casual conversation, Miri frowned, but now watched me with intent eyes. Hello, Sandy is on the line, said a familiar voice that I had not heard for many years. Hi, Sandy, this is Alan Dowd from the Grenville office. I don't even know if you remember me. My God, who am I hearing? Alan Dowd. Are you asking if I remember you? Damn, I've been dreaming about you for so many years. The very man I wanted but never got, and suddenly he calls me, well, Sandy answered, laughing. How the hell are you doing? She asked, but without waiting for an answer, she chatted on. It must be some kind of telepathy because You won't believe it, but just recently I was thinking about you. It's been... how long? Yes, it must be 16 years since you and I last spoke. At that very gala reception where we met, remember? I then saw you several more times at other ceremonies, but alas, I never got another chance to make up for lost time. But you yourself know how intense all these crowded events, important meetings, conversations, and other fuss were. Of course, I remember how we first met then, in Washington. I finally managed to wedge myself into her chatter. Actually, it was 17 years ago, although I must admit, apart from the award ceremony itself, I don't remember much from that night, I admitted to her, chuckling. Oh, Alan, you were so funny that evening. You could hear her smiling in her voice when she said these words. What do you even remember? Well, I remember how, after my clumsy thank you speech, I left the stage and then, it seems, we were still drinking champagne at the table. But I honestly admit, from that moment, everything in my memory became a little blurry. I can only say that this was the first and last time in my life when I got so drunk, I admitted embarrassedly. Sandy's loud, boisterous laughter came through the phony's speakers. Yes, damn it, by the end of the evening, you were pretty good, although, in my opinion, you didn't drink that much compared to the others. Alan, do you want frankness for frankness? She teased me with a sly voice. Well, hit me, Miss Thompson, with your frankness. It's interesting. I played along with my former colleague. I must admit that I had my eye on you that evening, although I knew that I had serious competition from all those unmarried ladies who gathered there that evening. Well, yes, of course. A tall, dark-haired, attractive guy, built just like you, looked like a pot of honey with excited bees hovering around him. Ah, ha, ha. Sandy laughed infectiously again. I joined her, glancing sideways at Miri, who, listening to Sandy's babbling revelations, pursed her lips in hostility, twisting them into a rather sour grin. When I dragged you to dance, then, quite by accident, I swear, I slid my hand there, below, and felt how, big and hard you are. It's getting a little hot here. Ah ha ha. Yeah, and then I almost fainted because of it. True, being called Miri all evening was a little unpleasant, but at least it showed me how much you loved your wife. After Sandy's words, Miri's expression changed sharply, and now she even seemed to turn a little pale. Around 11, you once again muttered, "Miri, dear," and then just passed out in your chair. When the party ended after midnight and everyone went to their rooms, you were still there in the hall, so I asked the night porter to help me drag you to bed. Yes. I definitely didn't remember all this, so I listened with interest to Sandy's story about that night, which became the starting point of no return in our story with Miranda. The big problem was that no one knew which room you were staying in, and the hotel computers were already disconnected from the network. As they said, a program update was carried out at night or something like that. I didn't really delve into it. The point is that these door key cards are all the same, and it doesn't say what number they are from. In general, the only reasonable solution at that time was to put you in my room, and believe me, this in itself turned out to be a difficult task for such a big guy as you were, and even barely moving your own. Members. There was a pause on the phone. Only some slight rustling was heard in the speakers. After a few seconds, Sandy spoke again. Sorry, I took a couple sips of water, but while I was chatting with you, I got a fever, and my throat was dry with all these memories, she admitted with a laugh. So where did I stop there? Oh, yes. You finally ended up in my room. Well, I have to admit that at that moment I was ready to get a little naughty, she said in a rather embarrassed voice. I already said that I accidentally felt your, unit when the receptionist and I were trying to drag you onto the bed. It was just a casual touch, but I immediately realized that you were not only tall, but also something of a decent size. Well, you know what I mean? She sprayed into the phone again. To my regret, you almost passed out while we were dragging you into the room. and then you immediately collapsed on the bed, muttering something inaudibly. You know, even though I wanted you, Sandy sighed, but doing something with an almost insensitive body, this, in my opinion, is somehow piggish, and generally not in my rules. Be that as it may, I myself was a little drunk that night and very horny, so I stripped naked and lay down next to you, hoping that when you open your eyes and see me, it will surely seduce you. Well, she sighed involuntarily again. It's obvious that this trick of mine never worked, because when I woke up in the morning, there was already no trace of you, and no one there saw you until the end of the weekend, no matter how much I asked. So all I can say, Alan, is that your wife must be a very lucky woman. Miri, her eyes widening in shock, covered her mouth with both palms, and the enormous scale of what she had done struck her like thunder. I honestly admit that at that moment, I did not have any sympathy for my ex-wife, because the root cause of the entire disaster of our marriage was her own hasty actions and arrogance. The subsequent cold-blooded planning and years of calculated scheming aimed only at getting revenge on me prove it that I did not actually know the real Miri. Oh, about that, I responded. Now she is already my ex-wife, and if I then knew what I know now, I think I would have agreed to your tempting offer, I answered Sandy, chuckling. She laughed loudly. Well, honey, you're about 7 years too late if you were hoping to restore our connection. Now I am a very happy married woman with 2 wonderful children. I continue to use the last name Thompson in the office because all my clients know it and are used to it. Well, actually, officially, I'm Sandy Roberts. I met Robert 8 years ago, and he was the first after you who managed to find a way to my heart. At these words, a wrinkle appeared on Miri's tense forehead. She squeezed the edges of the table with her fingers, and her face was distorted in a pained grimace. With a fixed gaze, she stared at the phone lying in the middle of the table, as if the head of a viper was swaying in front of her, ready to pounce. Looking into Miranda's face, I was puzzled, because I did not understand her reaction. By the way, it's because of Rob that I thought about you, buddy. Isn't it weird? She said, laughing. Well, the thing is that his older brother Dan is getting married in a couple of weeks, and his fiancée, named Andy, like you, has the last name Dowd. So I wondered if she was your relative, because you are the only person named Daoud among the people I know. Well, now I understand Miri's reaction. I can't say that now, among my relatives, there is someone named Andy, I said with a fair amount of irony, looking at Miri. Although, in fact, I remember that the only relative I knew with such a name was still in high school. It was so long ago that I almost forgot about it. Oh, by the way, I remember that she hated being called that so much that she would just get mad and scream like crazy because she thought people would mistake her for a guy. I grinned, looking meaningfully at Miranda, who blushed like a boiled crab, looking away and pursing her lips in shame. I really didn't know the real her anymore. Come on. No one would mistake Andy for a guy now. She's gorgeous. She has amazing children, Kelly and Luke, who are now in college. Kelly and Dan's daughter, Cassie, are best friends and share a room in Florida. They were both bridesmaids in my wedding, and Luke was Rob's usher. He did a great job preparing the ceremony and entertaining the guests. Yes, a great guy, let me tell you. Over the years, we spent Christmas and Thanksgiving several times with Dan, Andy, and her children. Rob once told me that they dated and interacted closely on and off for 13 years. Can you imagine? That short statement told me so much. This proved that Miri's parents certainly knew what was going on between Miri and Dan and always had her back. When my wife was away from home, I would always call her, and they would make all sorts of excuses for her as to why I couldn't talk to her directly. And soon after, Miri would call me back. As I pondered Sandy's last words, mechanically assenting to her, suddenly her tone of voice became more serious, and she began to speak a little more quietly. Actually, Alan, to be honest, I don't think they should get married, because even if they go for it, their marriage will be doomed in advance. Yes? I was surprised. Why do you think so? What could stop them, since they have been together for so long? Miri, as a directly interested person, was even more amazed than I was. Her eyebrows flew up, Her mouth parted, and she tensely leaned forward. Lord, Alan, because they are both serial traitors. I mean, Dan also cheated on his first wife, Lisa, with Andy. I don't know how, much less why he did it, because Lisa, I assure you, was also stunning, although I never actually met her. But I saw her photographs. Anyway, Andy and I had a candid conversation about this one day, and she told me that her husband and children understand that she has a husband at work and a husband at home. She said that she divided her time between the two of them, while her house husband had something similar with the woman he worked with. Can you imagine such a relationship? Yeah, I mumbled, unsuccessfully trying to catch Miranda's stubbornly elusive gaze, who was looking anywhere but into my eyes. A ripe beet could envy the deep brightness of the color of her cheeks, neck, and even part of her chest, which was now heaving intermittently. I made sure to make it clear to Rob that I would not hesitate to rip out his belongings if he ever even thought about such a thing. Sandy shared with me her uncompromisingness in this matter with threatening confidence. And then she simply and unpretentiously detonated a bomb, dropping a damaging weapon directly on my ex's head, although Sandy herself did not even suspect it. Well, Dan still has someone on his side despite his relationship with Andy. This is kind of his thing. I think that this dog always had an alternate airfield, she snorted. His current girlfriend's name is Tilly, and he sees her every time he's in Chicago. By the way, from what Rob told me, he specially arranges these business trips for himself so that he can go there every couple of weeks. Watching Miri's reaction, I saw that her complexion changed from bright red to first pale, and then she seemed to even turn a little green. Leaning onto the table, she silently gasped for air, and it seemed that just a little more, and she would vomit right on the spot. Sandy continued to animatedly post the latest news from my former best friend's shithole. I don't think they would have gotten married at all if his bosses hadn't directly ordered him to make Andy an honest woman after her real husband sued the company when she divorced him. Can you imagine, Alan? Her house husband had a completely different understanding of this relationship, and he did not put up with all this chaos. There are still normal men, right? Rob told me in confidence that his company had to fork out a significant amount of money to hush up this matter. 100 pieces. Thank you very much. I thought to myself, and in addition, they gave Dan an ultimatum. He must correct the situation so that everything is covered, otherwise they will show him the door. How do you like it? Not the best basis for starting a life together, is it? Continue to bang on the side of your bride, and at the same time look into the barrel of a double-barreled gun pointed at her face. Miri jumped up, knocked over a chair, and, stumbling, rushed into the bathroom, and within a few seconds, I heard her throwing up inside out. I can't blame her for this. After everything she heard today, her cozy little world that she had built so long and carefully turned upside down and was literally flushed down the toilet. Honest, loving, and loyal, Dan turned out to be a fake, but that, fortunately, was no longer my problem. I chatted with Sandy for a few more minutes, during which she told me with love and pride in her voice about her children, and also asked me what I was going to do now. I told her that, on the recommendation of my former company, I was already applying for a job in a branch of an insurance company whose office was located not far from my mother's house. True, instead of the usual insurance sales, I was offered to investigate suspicious insurance cases, and for me this was a very interesting area and a new challenge in my career. The money would not be the same as what I earned before, but it would still more than cover my needs. Among other things, my new position came with a personal office and a personal assistant, so in terms of work, I was back on the horse and looking to the future with cautious optimism. Miranda returned, exhausted, clutching the walls as I ended my conversation with Sandy, exchanging numbers and promising to keep in touch from time to time. After saying goodbye to Sandy and pressing the end button, I looked at Miri. My ex-wife was clearly not in the best shape. Her face was wet, pale, and miserable, and most of her expertly applied makeup was either smudged or simply disappeared. Now Miranda looked as if she had aged many years in just 15 minutes. "To me so pitiel," she sobbed, collapsing powerlessly into a chair and dropping her head on her outstretched arms. This time, I really believed her. "Me too, Miranda. Me too. Listen, I don't have time right now. I need to follow the tracks of one type while they are still fresh, so by morning I should be in Brunswick," I answered, glancing briefly at my watch. From here to Brunswick, it was about a 6-hour drive if you grilled non-stop, but I knew I'd have to stop a couple of times along the way. "All these boxes are yours. They contain all the clothes, photographs, and other junk that you left." I waved my hand towards the packages piled up in the corridor next to the entrance. "I was going to send them to you next week, but since you're here, I can help by throwing them in your car if you want," I suggested to her in an even voice, out of the indestructible politeness instilled in me by my parents and remaining indestructible. "Actually, can I ask you a big favor?" she muttered quietly, not even having the courage to look me in the eyes as she spoke. Can I stay here for the night? I don't think I could go back home. There right now." I thought about it for a few seconds, jingling the set of keys on my finger, and then unhooked a couple and placed them on the table in front of her. "What the hell? Why not? Here are your keys and flag in your hands. Stay. But when you leave, you will have to leave them in the office of the real estate office," I warned Miri. "The new tenants will arrive on Monday, so you have a whole 9 days at your disposal, if, of course, you need them. This Sunday people will come here to help me take unnecessary things to the landfill and clean my apartment. Utilities will continue to provide their services until Monday." Finally, I looked around the room again and mentally slapped myself on the forehead. Walking over to the mantelpiece, I picked up a greeting card that had almost been left there from my caring colleagues from my previous job. In my new place, I will continue to be warmed by the friendly sincerity and warmth of their hearts. Now all that remains is to say the last goodbye to your ex. Okay, it's all over now. Take care, Miri. I really have to go. Goodbye. I hope we never see each other again. As I walked out, I turned around and took one last look at the one I once loved with all my heart. All that remains in my memory is the hunched shoulders of a broken woman sitting at the table, trembling with painful sobs. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.